A lot of people heard Charleston White say one wild thing about Claressa Shields, Papoose, and babies, and that was enough for the internet to turn the whole conversation into a meme. But if you listen all the way through, the most explosive part was not even the line everybody clipped. The real story is that Charleston White mixed praise, disrespect, observation, and provocation into one messy rant, and that combination hit a nerve because it forced people to ask a question they did not want to ask out loud. Are people defending Claressa Shields because she is right, or because she is powerful, famous, and almost impossible to criticize without getting dragged? So let's slow this all the way down, because this situation got loud fast. Charleston White started in a place that actually matters. He did not deny Claressa Shields' greatness in the ring. He did not act like her resume was fake. He did not question whether she is elite. In fact, the core of what he said was the opposite. He basically made it clear that when it comes to boxing, Claressa Shields is that woman. And that distinction is exactly why the rest of the conversation got so uncomfortable. Because once somebody acknowledges your talent first, it becomes harder to dismiss every criticism that follows as simple hate. That is where the internet started playing its favorite game, selective hearing. People grabbed the most outrageous part, posted the shortest clip possible, and built their entire reaction around the most combustible sentence. That is how social media works now. Nobody wants the full frame if the cropped version is more dramatic. And Charleston White knows that better than almost anybody. He talks in landmines. He says one thing to startle you, one thing to insult you, one thing to make you laugh, and then he sneaks a real point right through the middle while everybody is still reacting to the disrespect. Now, let me be very clear. A statement can be provocative and still be reckless. A comment can create discussion and still cross a line. Both things can be true at once. But if we are being honest, Charleston White did not just throw random words at the wall. He was aiming at the optics around Claressa Shields, Papoose, and the public baby talk that has had people side-eyeing this entire situation for a minute. Because here is the part people keep skipping. If a woman publicly talks about building a future with a man whose marriage is still legally unresolved, people are going to ask questions. Not because they hate her. Not because they think she cannot fight. Not because they deny her success. They are going to ask questions because the timeline itself invites them. It does. That does not mean strangers are entitled to every private detail. It does mean that once relationship plans become public branding, the audience will measure those plans against reality. And that is where Charleston White turned the volume all the way up. Instead of calmly saying the situation looked messy, he made the point in the most jarring way possible. That is why some people laughed, some people cringed, and some people felt like he said the quiet part out loud in the rudest voice imaginable. But under all the noise was a simple issue: what exactly is the public supposed to do with future family talk when the present tense paperwork still looks unresolved? That question is not about whether Claressa Shields deserves love. It is not about whether Claressa Shields is accomplished. It is not even about whether Papoose is allowed to move on emotionally. The question is about public certainty. Social media loves to announce outcomes before the facts catch up. People soft launch endings before the ending is official. People build next season storylines while this season is still on fire. Then they get offended when the public notices the overlap. And Papoose is a huge part of why this story keeps pulling people in. For years, Papoose has carried an image that many people respected. Quiet. Loyal. Controlled. Measured. The kind of man who does not seem eager to turn every personal conflict into content. That image matters, because when somebody with that kind of reputation gets pulled into public romantic confusion, the reaction is different. People do not just ask what happened. They ask whether the image was incomplete, whether the silence was strength, or whether the silence was strategy. That is what made Charleston White's framing so interesting to people who were really listening. He did not talk about Papoose like some fairy tale hero. He talked about him more like a stabilizing force inside a chaotic picture. That is a very different idea. A romantic partner and a stabilizing force are not always the same thing. One is emotional language. The other is structural language. And once people start describing your relationship in structural terms, the conversation stops being cute and starts becoming clinical. Then comes the Remy Ma angle, and this is where the story picks up even more heat. Because the moment Remy Ma enters the chat, the public starts sorting everybody into roles. Who was wrong? Who was betrayed? Who moved first? Who knew what? Who used silence? Who used music? Who used the blogs? Who wanted sympathy? Who wanted control? Once that happens, the relationship stops being a relationship in the public imagination. It becomes a competing narrative machine. Charleston White's broader suggestion, whether people agree with it or not, was that some people can survive inside a public narrative longer than others. The quiet person often looks disciplined until the silence stops working. The loud person often looks unstable even when they are telling the truth. The polished person often gets more grace than the emotional person. And the person with the cleanest image usually gets the strongest benefit of the doubt until the timing starts looking strange. That is why this discussion touched a deeper nerve than jokes about babies. It raised the issue of labels. Think about how fast the internet labels women in these situations. Bitter. Jealous. Loud. Obsessed. Clout chasing. Unable to move on. Those labels get assigned so quickly that they often arrive before the audience has even processed what the person actually said. Once a label sticks, the public stops listening for information and starts listening for confirmation of the label. That pattern is bigger than Claressa Shields. It is bigger than Remy Ma. It is bigger than Charleston White. It is one of social media's favorite shortcuts. First, flatten the person. Then filter everything they say through the flattened version. After that, every emotional reaction becomes proof they are irrational, and every calm reaction becomes proof they are acting. Either way, the person loses. And if that sounds harsh, look at how the discourse has unfolded. When Claressa Shields speaks passionately, some people call it crashing out. When she defends herself, some people call it insecurity. When she claims her place, some people call it arrogance. But when she wins, suddenly the same intensity becomes marketable confidence. That contradiction is part of the reason her supporters go so hard. They feel like she is constantly being punished for not packaging herself in a way that makes people comfortable. At the same time, supporters have to be careful not to make her untouchable. That is the other half of this. Respecting Claressa Shields as a fighter should not mean nobody can question the public contradictions around the relationship narrative. Admiration should not cancel inquiry. If anything, fame increases inquiry. That is the trade-off. The higher the profile, the lower the privacy once personal storylines become recurring public content. And this is where Charleston White, in his own chaotic way, stumbled into a conversation that many people were already having privately. Not about whether Claressa Shields can fight. Everybody knows she can. Not about whether she deserves her success. She earned that. The real conversation is whether the image being sold to the public matches the reality unfolding in real time. People can tolerate scandal. What they hate is confusion packaged as certainty. There is also something else happening here that people do not always admit. Audiences love a strong woman until her strength stops being inspirational and starts becoming confrontational. Then the same traits that made her compelling become the reasons people say she needs to be humbled. That tension has followed Claressa Shields for years. She is celebrated as dominant, but the minute that dominance spills outside the ropes and into public conflict, a different standard suddenly appears. So when Charleston White says something disrespectful and then still circles back to her dominance in the ring, he creates a split-screen effect. On one side, there is the champion nobody wants to fight. On the other side, there is a public figure caught in a relationship mess that people feel increasingly free to critique. Those two realities can exist together, and that is exactly why the conversation refuses to die. Now let's talk about why the internet has been so stuck on this. It is not just the celebrity names. It is not just the marriage question. It is not just the comments. It is the fact that this story combines four things the internet cannot resist: status, romance, loyalty, and timeline confusion. Add one controversial commentator to that mixture, and now people are no longer discussing facts. They are projecting values. Some hear disrespect. Some hear honesty. Some hear misogyny. Some hear pattern recognition. Some hear clout chasing. Some hear a blunt description of what everyone else is tiptoeing around. That is why every new clip reignites the same argument. People are not debating one sentence anymore. They are debating what kind of truth counts. Does truth only count if it is delivered respectfully? Does disrespect automatically erase insight? If somebody says something offensive but points at a real contradiction, do we reject the message, the messenger, or both? Those are the questions sitting underneath all the reposts and reaction videos. And honestly, this is where Claressa Shields has the toughest job of anyone in the story. Being great in sports does not automatically make public scrutiny easier. In some ways it makes it worse. Because the stronger your image is, the more people want to test it. The louder the praise gets, the more eager critics become to find the crack in the statue. That does not mean every criticism is fair. It does mean greatness never protects anybody from narrative warfare. Papoose has his own pressure too. If he stays quiet, people read strategy into the silence. If he speaks, people dissect every word for motive. If he appears supportive, some people call it loyalty. If he appears calculating, some people call it maintenance. A quiet public image only works as long as the public continues to believe the silence means integrity instead of convenience. Remy Ma, meanwhile, sits in the background of this conversation like unfinished business. Because no matter how people feel about her, her name changes the temperature of the room. The moment she is mentioned, people stop talking only about the present and start recalculating the past. They revisit older posts, old records, old statements, old energy, old pain. And that is when stories stop moving forward in a straight line. They start folding back on themselves. This is why Charleston White's remarks detonated the way they did. Not because he unveiled some airtight proof. He did not. Not because he behaved with elegance. He absolutely did not. It blew up because he took a story people were already whispering about, shoved it into the brightest light possible, and forced everybody to pick what bothered them most: his language, the timeline, the relationship optics, the labels, or the possibility that public narratives are being protected more aggressively than the truth. And once a controversy reaches that stage, there is no clean way to put it back in the box. Every response creates another headline. Every denial becomes fresh material. Every lie becomes another round of interpretation. Every silence becomes suspicious to somebody. The machine keeps running because everybody involved means something different to the audience. Claressa Shields is not just a boxer to people. Papoose is not just a husband or partner figure to people. Remy Ma is not just an ex in the story to people. Charleston White is not just a commentator to people. They are all symbols now, and symbols create stronger reactions than facts. So where does that leave this whole mess? Right here, with a champion whose excellence is not in question, a relationship narrative that still confuses people, a public that keeps rewarding the wildest delivery over the deepest point, and a commentator who knows exactly how to make everybody angry enough to keep watching. The easiest response is to say he was completely out of pocket and move on. The laziest response is to say he told nothing but the truth and move on. The more honest response is harder. It is that he was reckless, strategic, offensive, and occasionally insightful all in the same breath. And that combination is exactly why the internet still cannot let it go. Because maybe the reason this conversation keeps surviving is not that people love drama. Maybe it is that people recognize a pattern. Public figures become untouchable in one area, and then supporters start acting like no questions are allowed in any other area. But life does not work like that. Being unbeatable in the ring does not make somebody immune from public doubt off the canvas. Being respected for loyalty does not make somebody immune from timeline questions. Having emotional supporters does not make every critic a liar. Having disrespectful critics does not make every underlying question fake. That is the tension sitting in the middle of all this, and that tension is why the story still has legs. So now I want to hear from you. When Charleston White praised Claressa Shields as a fighter but questioned everything around the relationship, do you think he was exposing a contradiction people were scared to say out loud, or do you think he just wrapped gossip in fake insight and counted on shock value to carry it? And when every person around a public situation gets labeled before their words can even land, do you see a pattern there, or do you think the internet is just doing what it always does when celebrity relationships get messy? Drop your take below, because this one is not dying anytime soon. And if you think this was messy, just wait until the next response clip lands, because that is when we will really find out who is defending facts, who is defending favorites, and who is simply defending the version of the story that feels best to believe.